Welcome and thank you for joining Sustainable Princeton's Great Ideas event, Going Beyond Climate Action and Economic Sustainability. Before we get started, we'd like to take a moment and thank our longtime partner for the Great Ideas series, the Princeton Public Library. We hope it's not too long before we can return to having these events live and in person at the library when it is safe to do so. If you missed our Environmental Film Festival, be sure to go to the Film Festival website to find out how you can watch the films that are available from this year and years past. We'd also like to thank our sponsor, NRG Energy, whose support allows us to bring you these events. And we want to start with a poll question. For some of those of you who are familiar with Princeton, you probably noticed the new configuration downtown. So if you can take a moment and share if you would like to see it remain past the pandemic. So we'll give everyone a few minutes to record their response. And once we get a good response, we will share the poll. All right, we've got about 77% of attendees, or 88%, that have recorded their vote. And here are the results. So 53% of tonight's audience would like to see the configuration remain. About 2 folks, about 5% would not. 21% are yes, but with changes, and about 21% don't know. So we hope you stay with us for the entire event. Councilwoman Pirone Lambros is going to be talking about the status of the downtown area and what the plans are to, or possible solutions are to keep that configuration past the pandemic. So a few housekeeping items before we get into the meat of tonight. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. You can enter questions at any time during the webinar, and we will answer them during the Q&A. So if you look at your toolbar, which is probably at the bottom of your screen, you should see the Q&A icon, and that's where you can enter the questions. You can also upvote questions by clicking on the thumbs up icon. We also would like you to mark your calendars for the rest of our Great Ideas series. The theme of our series is Going Beyond Climate Action Plan and the co-benefits that are in the Climate Action Plan. We're going to talk a little bit more about co-benefits. So the next event is on December 2nd. The third event is on February 3rd, and our last event of this series will be on April 7th. For the time being, they will most likely be virtual, but as I said, we hope we can get back to having them in person at the library as soon as possible. So for those who have attended our past events, this might look familiar to you. This is Princeton's Climate Action Plan emissions reduction goal. The town has a goal to reduce emissions 80% by 2050 with some interim goals that will get us there, get us towards our target. But a climate action plan is not just about emissions reductions. Climate action also brings with it co-benefits. The IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, defines co-benefits as positive benefits that are related to the reduction of greenhouse gases. In Princeton's Climate Action Plan, we've identified 5 possible co-benefits for every action. One being co-benefit of promoting equity, another being fosters economic sustainability, and that's the topic of tonight's event. The third is improving local environmental quality. The fourth is enhancing public safety and health. And lastly, another co-benefit is building resilience. This visual is to help you understand the relationship between mitigation and resilience actions in the Climate Action Plan and the co-benefits. We have 5 focus areas in the climate action plan. And as I mentioned, each action can have some possible co-benefits associated with it. If we count all the co-benefits, this is how they tally. This chart shows the total of co-benefits that further illustrate the importance of mitigation and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. Another way to look at it is, what if the effects of climate change aren't as bad as what we think they might be, or if we, aren't sure of how we're going to get to our target. If we do all these mitigation actions, we will get all these co-benefits. So why not do it? So with that background, I'm now going to introduce Yamile Slevy, Sustainable Princeton's board president. Yamile is a native of Columbia and a corporate lawyer by training. She comes to sustainability from the world of social justice and international trade. Since moving with her family to Princeton in 2006, she has worked with numerous local organizations as a way to get back to this diverse and welcoming community. You can find Yamile working on multiple initiatives that include green teams at local schools and a Save the Trees campaign in her own neighborhood.
Thank you, Christine.
Okay, I've asked you to share your video, Yamile, so you should see a request that will allow you to share your video.
Thank you, Christine. I'm very excited to be moderating this panel. This is a very, very important topic, and I think you did a great job, as usual, in picking or inviting the panelists who are deeply motivated, skilled, and actually hardworking members of our community or of the state. So Christine, thanks for your introduction. Christine outlined the landscape that we have right now. And currently we have on the one hand, the roadmap of the Climate Action Plan, Princeton's Climate Action Plan, with a clear goal of an 80% reduction of our community's carbon emissions by 2050. On the other hand, we have the economic landscape with its challenges, such as 40 and growing vacancies in real estate, commercial real estate, and opportunities such as the open street initiatives and outdoor dining that we've all enjoyed over the summer and fall. We also have other opportunities such as clean energy resources available to our small and mid-sized businesses from the state. And our panelists are going to discuss these topics further. But if we take all of this information, our roadmap of the Climate Action Plan, the challenges and opportunities, the incentives and programs that will become available to small and mid-sized businesses, we will, and sit with that for a minute, we're able to dream and reinvent Princeton and what Princeton's going to look like in the future. So we can start thinking about the Princeton of the future. So that's why I'm so excited about this panel, because by discussing this topic in detail with our panelists, we'll be able to see how by reinventing this Princeton of the future, we will also be able to achieve one of the co-benefits that Christine mentioned, which is the sustainable economic development. And what does that mean? It means that we will, yes, achieve a vibrant and revitalized town. We could, but that it would be a low emissions vibrant town, and that we will have more green jobs. Our small businesses and mid-sized businesses will use clean technologies and green infrastructures. So we are at crossroads right now. And these two panelists that we have invited, Michelle and Jonathan, will give us more details, such as the nuts and bolts of how we're going to achieve this together. So Jonathan, first I'm going to introduce Jonathan. Jonathan is the advisor for clean energy and green finance at the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. Jonathan, I was joking with him earlier, he is a reformed lawyer or a recovering lawyer like I am, which means we're now working on topics that matter. He used to be the Deputy General Counsel and Vice President of Verizon. And then after he retired, he also joined Grid Alternatives, which is a national nonprofit whose mission is to bring community solar to low and moderate income communities. So very excited to have Jonathan with us tonight. His current job mostly focuses on driving economic growth and development, and he leads all the green initiatives at the Development Authority. And Michelle, our second panelist tonight, is council member, and she's only joined council here in Princeton at the beginning of this year, but she's done so much that it seems like she's been around for a while. So she's also a member of several committees, many, but I remember affordable housing, public art, public safety, shade tree, and others, and of course, economic development. But she is the liaison of council to the Princeton Merchants Association. Michelle is also a business owner, and she has focused her community work on assisting small and mid-sized businesses through the pandemic and working on the Small Business Resiliency Fund. So I'm thrilled to have these two panelists. As I said, I can't wait to hear all the details from them. But in the meantime, I'm going to share with you a call to action. If you are on this panel and you are a resident or you are a small business owner, I want to share something very personal. I feel like an activist and that I'm really voting with my dollars when I make a small choice to whether order a product via Amazon or walking to town and buying it at Labyrinth or at the Sam's or any small store in Princeton. And I feel like I'm making my vote and my voice heard. And I hope you join me in doing that. We can vote for the town that we want to see, the town that we want our kids to live in, and we're voting also for the planet that we want to see in the future. And for the small business owners, I would like to ask you to embrace all the opportunities that there are to build green, to develop in a low emissions kind of perspective, but also to start thinking that big companies such as Microsoft launched this year an initiative to not only be carbon neutral, but carbon negative by 2030. So it's no longer a matter of doing the right thing or thinking it might potentially be useful to go green, as we say, but it's something that will allow you to remain relevant as businesses. It's a conversation between consumers and in businesses, so I encourage you to have that conversation and keep voting with your dollars when you make purchases and support the town. So with that, I'm going to have Jonathan start the conversation and with all his recommendations and ideas about how to green businesses in New Jersey.
Thank you, Yamile, and thank you to Christine and Molly and Jenny and Sustainable Princeton for the opportunity, for the invitation.
Jonathan, just a moment. You should have a request to share your video.
Okay.
And if you give me a moment, I'm going to switch over to your slide deck. So if you want to keep talking in a moment, you'll see your slides appear.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, again, thanks for the opportunity. I think it's very important to get to have this type of dialogue with the folks who are on the front lines in the communities. So much of the impetus and initiatives that are important in the clean energy and climate change area are coming from the local level, and the opportunity for this kind of discussion and exchange, I think, is really critical. I thought I would start. Let me say first that at the end of my little talk, I'm going to share my email address and cell phone number, and to the extent that folks have any questions, comments, recommendations for us that don't get covered during this discussion, I would really love to hear from you. So for instance, if you're a small business owner in Princeton that would be very interested in seeing how they might be able to tap into our plans to provide incentives for deployment of electrified commercial vehicles, we want to hear from you about what you see as your needs and what kind of program would make the most sense for you. So if we could just skip to the next slide, I want to just say a minute about who we are at the EDA. As I think most everyone would know, we are the principal agency in New Jersey with the mandate to implement the governor's economic development strategy and to drive economic growth. You've probably heard the motto or the summary description of the current administration's economic development strategy as stronger and fairer. That's been the approach from the get-go, and obviously in light of our economic situation now in the midst of this ongoing pandemic, there's a strong feeling, certainly in government, I think everywhere in the state, that we need to double down on both pieces of that set of goals and those objectives, as we see in particular those at the bottom potentially falling further behind, and in fact falling further behind in many cases as a result of the pandemic. The agency has strongly embraced these last several years, a focus on small and medium business. We do focus mainly on the commercial and industrial sectors. There's been a very strong focus over these past years on developing centers of excellence in the state for innovation, and clean energy is one of those innovation sectors that that we have been focusing on. I should point out that there's a separate sector for offshore wind energy, which I will not be focusing on now, given the scale of the commitment the state is making there and the level of resources being deployed. There is a separate group focusing on that, teaming with the DEP and the Board of Public Utilities. My portfolio has covered matters other than offshore wind. And I would say right at the outset, important to note that we collaborate very closely with other agencies in government, particularly the Board of Public Utilities and the Department of Environmental Protection. Next slide. So what I'd like to do is focus on a couple of areas where EDA has been bearing down hard to design and launch programs to support various objectives in the clean energy and climate change mitigation arena. You can see them here: clean transportation, particularly in the medium and heavy duty vehicle area, driving towards the creation of a New Jersey Green Bank, or Green Fund as we're calling it, and also really stepping up our game in the state to make New Jersey a center of excellence for clean tech innovation. And by that, I mean, not simply deploying the proven technologies like photovoltaics and energy efficiency measures, but really doing everything we can to support the innovators, the young businesses that are, working at the forefront to develop the new technologies. Next slide. I've noted in the Princeton plan that and materials that the transportation piece of the carbon budget for the municipality is estimated around 30%. You probably won't be surprised, to know that on a statewide basis, it's even higher. And at 42% of our overall transportation's overall contribution to our carbon footprint, that's the high end across the country. And, it's a result of a kind of push and pull factors. On the one hand, if you stop and think about it, we are obviously a very densely populated state with critical transportation corridors running up and down and across, with a lot of heavy-duty trucks plying our roads. Obviously, a lot of just vehicle miles traveled of all types, light-duty vehicles as well as trucks and other types of vehicles. And it's on the other hand, a positive story that actually in New Jersey, we look relatively good compared to many states on the power generation front, right? Because virtually all coal at this point, other than one or two very small plants at this point, have been eliminated from our power generation, footprint. So we are focused now very much, next slide, sorry, on medium and heavy duty vehicle electrification. And you're probably all aware of the fact that early in the year, it seems so long ago because it was in the months just prior to the pandemic starting, legislation was passed to really support the deployment and purchases of light duty vehicles in the state. There's up to $5,000 per vehicle cash on the hood, soon to be in the form of cash on the hood incentive that is being made available. Our focus here, though, is on medium and heavy duty vehicles. Again, that's very much tied into the fact that our funding is coming from RGGI, which is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative that this past year the state rejoined. That was pursuant to an executive order that Governor Murphy issued within his first couple of weeks in office, almost about 2.5 years ago now. And right in that executive order, he made clear that when we returned to RGGI, the funding that would be resulting from our participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative needed to be deployed to support environmental justice objectives. So, the interesting thing about medium and heavy duty vehicles is that they do, for the most part, make use of diesel fuel. Diesel fuel may not have a disproportionately bad impact in the area of greenhouse gases, but when it comes to traditional criteria pollutants, the kinds of pollutants that really stay local and affect people locally, as opposed to greenhouse gases, which obviously, wherever greenhouse gases are generated, they're contributing to a collective global problem, right? And it's a global, budget that we're trying to address in terms of mitigating climate change and holding down greenhouse gases. The effect of traditional criteria pollutants is local and very disproportionately affects environmental justice communities in the state. You only need to look at the asthma rates in places like the Ironbound adjacent to the ports of Newark and Elizabeth to see the impact of the kind of traditional criteria pollutants that are generated by the medium and heavy duty vehicles, both operating in the ports and driving and idling, either idling in or driving through those areas adjacent to the ports. Next slide. So it is a very complex kind of simultaneous equation that we are working with our expert colleagues at the Board of Public Utilities and the DEP to try to sort out around supporting the deployment and accelerated adoption of medium and heavy duty vehicles. On the left, you see two different forecasts for what the future might look like in terms of adoption of medium and heavy duty vehicles in the state. And the right gives you a sense of all the different classes of vehicles and use cases that we're talking about. We're talking about everything from the kind of vehicle that's maybe just a few thousand pounds heavier than what you consider to be a light duty truck, to the heaviest so-called Class 8 trucks that do drayage and move cargo in and out of our ports. It's a very, as I said, complex equation. What kinds of incentives, what kinds of levels of incentives are appropriate? Which vehicles and which use cases should we focus on first? You can't boil the ocean this is not going to all be solved at once. So where do we aim first? How do we ensure the most possible benefit for environmental justice communities? We need to also look at issues of total cost of ownership. There are certain kinds of medium and heavy duty vehicles used for certain kinds of things where the feeling is that we're moving towards convergence between the total cost of ownership for the electric version and the internal combustion engine version of a vehicle. By total cost of ownership, I mean that maybe the front end purchase cost is higher, but because the cost for maintenance and for fuel, whether in the form of electricity or diesel, power and repairs is lower on the electric side, that we're moving quickly towards a time when the economic case for some of these vehicle classes and uses can be supported without incentives. Next slide. But to tie this back into the economic situation that New Jersey faces, in all of these programs, we are very focused on trying to do whatever can be done to stimulate the local supply chain. The slide shows you that we have plenty of purchasing power in the traditional medium and heavy duty vehicle marketplace here in New Jersey, and are certainly positioned to have similarly heavy purchasing power for electric vehicles. So the trick shot, and it's something that we're very heavily focused on, is how do we incentivize the deployment of vehicles and at the same time ensure that that deployment of vehicles also results in as much investment in job creation in this sector, as is possible. And with EDA, we've heard from many groups of potential vehicle operators, as well as supply chain participants who have come forward with proposals they're interested in seeing rolled out and participating in rolling out in the state. If you go to the next slide, there's just many businesses already out there operating in the zero emissions vehicle workspace, and we're trying to do what we can through these programs to attract as much of that activity as possible. And we can come back to this more during the Q&A. Next slide. I'm gonna have to speed up a little here, and we can come back to some of these things during Q&A. The Green Bank, we are right now in the process of bringing on a consultant that will assist us in the design and launch of a green bank for the state. This is an idea that's been kicking around in New Jersey since at least Governor Murphy's transition 2.5 years ago. It's been kicking around the country and the world for a number of years now. There are at this point about 10 states and a number of localities as well that already have green banks. The key thing, I'm showing some examples of the kind of impact that green banks have already had. Different green banks, different forms. The main thing, though, to emphasize is that in all cases, green banks so far, and certainly what we would be aiming to do with a green bank, is to essentially use public dollars to drive as much private investment, mainly private loan finance, as possible. The theory of the case is that there are certain kinds of investments in clean energy and in energy efficiency, and in our case, most likely in resiliency measures as well, potentially, that private capital is somewhat risk averse and is not willing to dip their toe into the water. Next slide. But the idea is that a green bank, if it's doing its job well, basically terminates its programs after a time, because it has successfully brought private lenders to the table, and they no longer need to play a role in getting private capital to support these kinds of investments. There's lots of different kinds of issues we're going to need to kind of work through in the coming months with the hope of launching the Green Bank by late in 2021, what kind of customers we're going to focus on, what kind of additional funding sources we may seek in addition to the RGGI funds that we are allocated through through our participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. What kind of organizational model? The majority of green banks are still state-owned and operated, but increasingly in recent years, many of these banks have been set up as private nonprofits, or government banks have been transitioned into private nonprofits. And finally, next slide, there's the question of exactly what kind of programs we're going to try to actually deploy. This gives you kind of just a sense of the kinds of things we're talking about. They're maybe somewhat technical, but they all come down to the idea of trying to de-risk lending for private lenders to get them off the sidelines. And particularly in this environment we're in, where public finance is in such difficult straits, and the fiscal circumstances of the state, as all states, is so difficult, it's so important to leverage those public dollars as much as possible to bring in private capital. Next slide. I want to spend a special minute on PACE, and I think that I'm almost through my allotted upfront time. So let me just say that property assessed clean energy is something that's been kicking around in the state. Various pieces of legislation have been out there on and off for years, and there are two pieces of legislation out there right now. Both have been passed, one by each legislature. The Economic Development Authority has a role to play in the design and launch and oversight of these programs under both. Not for me to speak to which legislation at what time, but suffice to say that I think that commercial property assessed clean energy, which I hope we can talk about a little more during the Q&A, is I think a very important potential tool for local governments to deploy to help drive forward clean energy agendas. And I personally would like to see nothing more than for Princeton to take the same kind of leadership role it has in so many other areas involving climate change mitigation and clean energy, with property assessed clean energy. If we can skip through the next two slides. Okay, we can come back to this afterwards. And on to the next slide. The last thing I'll mention is that with support from the Board of Public Utilities, we are also ramping up our efforts to support clean tech innovation in the state. Again, focusing on the early stage entrepreneurs. It's the second and third box on this page that we're ramping up on right now. We expect to have a seed grant program launched early in 2021 to support early stage clean tech entrepreneurs with a kind of funding that helps get them move to the next stage of technological readiness. At the same time, we're also going to be doing things to work at the ecosystem level, not the individual investor level, like, for instance, doing a careful mapping of all the R&D assets that are out there in this state to support clean tech, making sure that we are doing everything we can to have those assets shared among universities and entrepreneurs and nonprofits in the most optimal possible way, and even providing grants and vouchers to enable clean tech entrepreneurs to access some of these assets that often sit idle on a low cost or no cost basis. Next slide. And just to put one in for the home team, a very good example, right in Princeton's backyard, and Luca Technologies, I'm going to give a shout out to. I think tonight they are competing in a national clean tech competition in the finalist stage. This is a good example of the kind of things that the state is capable of, particularly in collaboration with some of our great research universities. None of them obviously greater than your Princeton University. This is a company commercializing a technology developed at Princeton by Professor Lynn Liu. She might even be a Princeton resident. She's the head of the Anglinger Center, and it's really a next generation kind of smart glass technology that can. It doesn't need to be wired. It both serves as a smart glass, window glass, to kind of improve the overall heating and cooling footprint of a building. And it also, at the same time, doesn't need separate power source. It functions as a photovoltaic. Just an example of one of the many kinds of businesses that we're trying to support. We provided Anluca just a small amount of support to help pay their tuition for an accelerator program that they participated in this past summer. Last slide. Maybe we can save this for the Q&A. I think I've gone over time, but there are certainly a few thoughts that I'd like to share, and really would like to hear from you all even more about things that Princeton might be able to do to sync up with some of the programs and initiatives that I've quickly tried to cover.
Thank you, Jonathan. Now we're going to have Michelle join us.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I just get my video going here. Thank you, Yamil. And Jonathan, that was a very intriguing presentation. I really enjoyed. We are talking a lot about going EV and what the opportunities will be on the municipal level as well. So it's really good to see. There's a lot of a good hope. And Yamil, I have to comment on something you said in your intro, and that is about shopping local and how you really make the effort, because that is all about being sustainable. So I think that's where we start. We start here at home and helping to support our local businesses. So thank you, everyone, for inviting me to be here this evening. And Christine, I guess you'll be doing my slides if you can move forward. Thank you. So currently, we talk a little bit first of all about the challenges and opportunities we have in today's Princeton's business climate. Unfortunately, with our situation today, we have about 40 vacancies and growing. We are filling some of those vacancies, but we do have various challenges. One is a perception that our rents are high, that we don't have enough parking, that we have high costs to start a business, and a lot of barriers of entry. So those are challenges that we need to work on. And there's also a lot of opportunities that we have today. We have, for instance, a lot of excitement right now and energy that's been created by the outdoor dining. We have, through this pandemic and through this crisis, there's been a real coming together of the business community leaders, helping each other, meeting each other, exchanging ideas. And so that energy is a real opportunity. We have an opportunity to rethink parking. And we are also really working on transportation issues and what the future is going to hold. And all of this also looking at the high density development projects that are coming online, in part because of our affordable housing obligation, but really our overall dedication to having more economic diversity in town and finding that missing middle housing opportunity. And there's just a lot coming down the road. And all of this all ties into what our economic revitalization plans will be. Go ahead, Christine, with the next slide. Thank you. So I mentioned the outdoor dining opportunity. Now, there's been a lot of real energy and great feedback about what we've created over the summer with the closing off of one lane and parking and having outdoor dining all down Witherspoon and Hullfish and having outdoor dining on Nassau Street and just really all throughout town. But particularly, there is a coinciding of the fact that Witherspoon Street has a grant from the state, and we were working through a design process that had started before COVID. And so now we're looking at how can we create a permanent solution to to having either a full closure or one way with parking, one way without parking, two-way, all the various options. And we have a mix of businesses as well on Witherspoon and the adjacent streets. So you have competing interests and things that need to be taken care of in terms of needs. You have retailers, you have full service restaurants, cafes, takeout restaurants, and so on. And also what the residents and visitors to Princeton would like. And there's been some really strong feedback. And I think tonight's opening survey, I think there's still 21%, wasn't sure exactly. So I'll show you a few options. Go ahead with the next slide. Thank you. So this is what it looks like right now with the bin blocks blocking off down Witherspoon Street. So we have one way of traffic with one way parking on part of it, and then the rest of it is a quick 10-minute curbside pickup. Go ahead with the next slide. This is how it looked before COVID and before we did the blocking off. So you see it's pretty car centric. You have 2 lanes of parking and 2 lanes of cars and very narrow sidewalks. So really no opportunity to have outdoor dining. Go ahead with the next slide. So we have had several public meetings and meetings with the business community and the business leaders on that are particular to the street, and trying to really balance what their varying needs are. Some of the businesses need parking, or they at least need curbside pickup. And some of the businesses actually can't have deliveries come through the back because they have no back door. So we have some concerns there. And then we have some, many full service restaurants, the sit down restaurants that have outdoor dining that just love it and would love to just close the street. So you have those competing interests that we're balancing. So this one-way hybrid that we're looking at is the idea where it's yellow would be extended sidewalks. You would have one way of traffic, and then you would have areas where the cars could park. And then green is actually green space that actually I think is also like a wastewater management, a rain garden type of green space. Go ahead with the next slide. This would be two-way with just parking on one side, but you can see where the sidewalks are narrower and will give less of the ability for outdoor dining. Next slide. And those are just a couple of options. I won't go into all the various options, but we are trying to balance these varying needs. But if you look at some of these design ideas, and you really can create an interesting pedestrian feel and still accommodate cars. You can see where there's, a variety of ways to handle the green space. And I think there's just a lot of really clever ideas. And our engineering department and Deanna Stockton leading that, our engineer, is really trying to work at balancing that. So that's kind of what we're looking at. We have this opportunity to do something with Witherspoon Street that, really it could be another 25, 30 years until we have the ability and the funding to redo Witherspoon Street. So, so it's a great opportunity. Go ahead with the next slide. So, so that's what we're looking at in the long term. In the shorter term, obviously, we want to. What are we going to do the next, during the winter months? So, we want to try and continue, if weather permits, to continue the outdoor dining as far out as we can. We're looking at. We're discussing with restaurants. They're ordering the tenting and the heaters and doing as much as they can, because obviously we want to keep them safe and keep people outside. But it is really important to those businesses. And then looking into the winter months, how do we activate the streets so that we keep people going out? We bring reasons for people to come out and make the downtown fun. And when I say downtown, I mean, we can be all the way down, up and down Witherspoon, all the way to Witherspoon Jackson, Nassau Street, Palmer Square, and of course the shopping center. So we're doing, we're thinking about some type of a winter village, and we want to, kind of roll that out and see what people think. But think hot chocolate and coffee carts and maybe pastries and doing some fun promotions. The Merchants Association is going to launch again the holiday market days, which is like a scavenger hunt of having to go into different stores and collecting your stamps and then being eligible to win prizes. So that's going to also launch for December. Next slide. So, could we make Princeton into a winter village where we could have booths scattered throughout town? Again, just making it fun, but making it safe and keeping people outside as much as possible. If you have some handicraft vendors, some artists doing their artwork within a booth, and we're looking at what that would look like and how to do it in an economical manner. Doing it small scale, but also just generating some excitement throughout town. Next slide, please. This was one idea. This was like yesterday's idea. Today's idea might be a little different. We were looking at, can we use these little greenhouses? Can we build small shacks? So still kind of hammering that idea out. And I'm very open to anyone's suggestions or help that you'd like to give. I got some commitment today, which is really exciting to get some additional help. So if we can get this off the ground, we've got about 6 weeks to get it rolling, but it's something I think that would really help. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's short term. That's what we need to do between now and the end of the year is activate the streets and get some excitement going. But what about the medium to longer term, and how are we going to come out of this? I mentioned some challenges in the beginning. And so one of the things that the Economic Development Committee decided on a few weeks back, and that we've already moved forward with, is to bring on an economic development consultant who has worked with many municipalities throughout New Jersey on economic revitalization. And he is a member of the Downtown New Jersey organization. And we have already started our stakeholder meetings, and stakeholders being the commercial property owners, as well as the business owners, as well as some residents and other concerned nonprofit organizations that are all listening to the various aspects and options of how we can move forward. We're hoping to formulate a steering committee in a few weeks. And then that steering committee would bring back some recommendations to mayor and council by the first quarter of next year. Next slide. These are just some of the various business alliances and organizations that Stuart Copperweiss has worked with. And another thing that we plan to do in this period of having a steering committee is to listen and invite various executive directors of various, whether it's special improvement districts or business alliances or whatever the Main Street organization might be, to come and talk with us, because we'd like to learn from others, opportunities and see how we can move forward. Next slide, please. So one of the goals, so the goals that we're setting for this study, one of them is how do you manage the retail mix throughout town? So, I mentioned, the unfortunate situation where we have a lot of vacancies, and we've always challenged with vacancies, but, could we have someone who wakes up every morning and thinks, what does Princeton need? How can I go and knock on a door and see if I can bring in a different type of retail, a different type of restaurant, something that is not another repeat of something we already have. And the balancing that retail mix is really important. And again, learning from what other towns are doing that are successful will help us be more successful. And, Princeton, we're really blessed with having so much to offer. So if we can do this next step in managing, it's going to make us so much better. Next slide, please. So I mentioned to you before, there are a lot of new residential developments coming up over the next 3 to 4 years with approximately an additional 1,500 new residents to Princeton, and all of whom will be near commercial zones. So when you talk about having a shop local, a walking, biking type of residential feel. This is really important to the sustainability of our town and increasing the vitality and adding to the revitalization. So, you know, having the vision of how are we going to transport people around town? Are we going to have a more robust freebie bus where we have more routes, so it stops more frequently at more stops, so people move around in a more sustainable, less emissions type of way. So, you know, this increased density with the new residential development would add more patrons. I mean, that number would really help in terms of revitalizing the retail sector and the restaurants. But we will also need better transit solutions. In terms of more robust parking, the closer residents live to commercial zones, the less need for cars, but we still need to address what we're doing with the cars that are coming in, because we do have a lot of visitors. Next slide, please. Another goal for economic development, and I mentioned about marketing to potential businesses that would want to come in. We also want to encourage our residents to patronize our local businesses. We want to attract visitors. We need to add value to the businesses that are here, that we're creating more foot traffic for them. And then also we want to attract those new businesses to locate in Princeton. When we develop a robust marketing campaign, if we develop this, you know, winter village, it needs to be sustainable. So we need to have someone who can help us do this year after year and grow these various promotions, whether it's holiday prizes, coupon programs, sidewalk sales, scavenger hunts, the holiday market. All of these things can grow over time. And they add value, and they don't have to be expensive or real big. It's about activating the streets and creating excitement, bringing people in. I think that being able to sustain them through an ongoing professional management organization is really key to making all of this work. Next slide. Public art and placemaking. This is another essential component that I hear other New Jersey towns are really putting a lot into it. And we have such a wealth of, we have the Arts Council, we have the university, we have the Art Museum, we have such a wealth and just the residents alone that are so talented. We could have projects like murals and sculptures and special displays and other exciting things. And again, this creates excitement and activates our streets. Next slide. And then, you know, we have large scale projects we're already underway with Nassau Streetscape and our Witherspoon Street redesign. And then there's the little things that we can do. I mean, keeping our, you know, trees healthy, flowers planted, nice street lamps, keeping our sidewalks clean and clean trash bins. These kinds of organizations and alliances don't replace what the municipality is doing, but they can supplement it and add to creating even a cleaner, brighter town. So next slide. So this is what we're looking to do, is to create some type of business organization that would fund and manage a paid staff to execute on our goals. And it could be any type of this different, whether it's a special improvement district or an economic development corp. We're looking into that now, and that's what the steering committee will come back to Mayor and Council with, and we'll be having public meetings. So this is a long process, but it's an important process to start now, so that we can start to achieve these goals. Thank you. Okay, and then lastly, I'm open to your suggestions, your feedback, your comments, and I can open up now to the Q&A session, but here's my contact information, so feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Well, I'm very... Thank you so much, Michelle and Jonathan. I'm very thrilled here to have heard your presentations and also to hear how open you are to comments and suggestions and working with the public and businesses on their ideas too of what they want to see happen. But you have very powerful ideas and suggestions so far that I'm thrilled to learn about. We have some questions here for you, and I'm going to take the first one and see if both of you or one of you wants to take it. It says, Michelle and Jonathan, how can Princeton ensure that all businesses are able to participate in a climate-friendly economic revitalization? For example, the downtown commercial district doesn't end at Hamilton Wiggins. It extends all the way down to Valley Road and onto Lee Avenue. But often our focus is just on the businesses closer to and along Nassau Street.
I can take that first, maybe. I will say that I absolutely agree 100%. I'd love to see it really connected more with the development that's going to happen at Franklin, Witherspoon, and other residential development. There's also commercial development happening. So it's really essential that we include the Witherspoon-Jackson area. And I will say that several of the commercial property owners, as well as the business owners, have been involved in the stakeholder meetings already. And I'm hoping that they will be very involved in the steering committee so that there will be a connection because those are really vital businesses for us. So thank you for raising that.
Okay. And then the next question, maybe for Jonathan. Jonathan, did
Yeah,
you
Mel, yeah. First, can I ask Christine, or whoever is controlling the PowerPoints? I promised to put up my email address and phone number. That was on the last slide of the deck, but in my haste, I bailed right before that very last slide. So if there's a way to put it up for folks to see, because I am completely earnest in my request for offline questions as well as ideas.
We'll do at the end, Jonathan will also share it in Q&A.
Great. So look, I can't speak to the specifics of Princeton development, certainly not by area. So like the candidates often do in the political debates, I'm just going to take the question and use it to say what I wanted to say and see if I can kind of pretend that it's related. So I said I wanted to put in a pitch for a commercial property assessed clean energy. And I do think that it's relevant here because didn't get the chance to speak about it during my opening remarks. Not sure how many listening in are familiar with property assessed clean energy, but it is a mechanism that at this point has been effectively deployed in about half the states in the country. We have had various versions of legislation kicking around going back to early in the Christie years, and we still have not, gotten to the point of enacting and then putting in place a program. But I'm personally hopeful that it will happen soon. So first, a quick description for those who don't know about what property assessed clean energy means, and then the request to the Princeton community. So property assessed clean energy is essentially a financing mechanism that creates a way for private lenders to create a better credit profile for the lending they're going to do into commercial establishments for energy efficiency and renewable energy kinds of projects. Like many of the projects that businesses in Princeton could be interested in doing to contribute to climate change mitigation and improve the long-term health of their own businesses. The way they do it is basically by having the property tax collecting authority for the town, the municipality, where the project is going to be and where the borrower is going to be, essentially agree to treat the loan payments that have to come back to the lender like a property tax assessment. And the tax collector for that municipality essentially agrees to assess the loan service payments that are due, just like they would a property tax assessment. And they get treated the same way from a legal perspective. So what that means is that in the event that there is a default on property tax, what happens? Well, I mean, in those scenarios, you can have a property go to tax sale and the tax obligation rides through that tax sale and still attaches to the property. Same thing here with a CPACE loan. Were there to ever be a default, the obligation to pay the loan would just stay with the property and carry on to the next owner automatically. So that makes lenders much more willing to lend in certain circumstances. It also makes them much more willing to lend on much longer terms, right? And if you can stretch out the duration of a loan from, say, 10 years to 20 or 25 years, lower the level of debt service payment, that can make the difference between whether or not the energy efficiency gain, right, the cost efficiency gain through the energy efficiency measure or the renewable energy measure, whether those savings are enough to cover the debt service. So particularly in this environment where public dollars are so scarce and we're in such a difficult fiscal situation, and frankly, a lot of commercial banks and other private lenders are sitting on the sidelines and the capital markets are very frozen up. It's a very important tool. So what can Princeton do? As everybody knows, one of the unique things about New Jersey is that we've got 560 some odd municipalities that each feel very strongly about home rule, and among other things, each have their own property taxing authority. CPACE gets enacted at a state level, but then it needs to be adopted by individual taxing authorities. So it's a house by house, municipality by municipality effort to get CPACE actually deployed in New Jersey once a program is enacted. And again, I hope it will be, before too long. That's a pretty hard hand we've been dealt. In a state like Connecticut, they tax at the county level, and they've got 35 or so counties. So they just need to get 35 county governments on board instead of 560 plus municipalities to adopt the ordinance necessary to make this work. So my plea to Princeton is, you guys have shown yourselves to be leaders in the climate change mitigation and sustainability field in so many ways. It's going to be, I think, very helpful if Princeton can be one of the leaders when it is time for municipalities to roll up their sleeves and bear down on this available program and look at adopting an ordinance to make CPACE a reality in their municipalities. And I guarantee that if Princeton can be an early adopter, there will be many others that will follow your example. So that's my soapbox pitch that I wanted to get in on CPACE, that in an indirect way ties into the broader question of developing areas of the municipality that maybe have not gotten as much attention.
Thank you, Jonathan. So now we have a second question that's very deep, and I'll see how each one of you wants to respond it. How do we balance the need to support local businesses while being mindful of the emissions from our consumption habits?
Should I go first?
I can take it or whatever you prefer.
Jumping in, Jonathan. Go ahead.
I guess I feel that there seems to be little disagreement at this point that from a long-term economic perspective, there's really no inconsistency or tension between supporting climate change mitigation goals and supporting economic development goals, right? I mean, energy efficiency measures, they still are all over New Jersey and all over the country, the low-hanging fruit, where, again, some of the kinds of things that don't get done typically that could lower the emissions of a particular business and the footprint of a business, they have payback periods of just several years, but yet they don't get done. Why? Because businesses tend to think of what's in front of them. It's not their business is not to do energy efficiency measures, so it goes to the back, burner. Same thing with even renewable energy, where solar at this point is considered to be, probably the single cheapest form of energy generation. Certainly when you do it at scale on a grid level, maybe not when you're doing it at the level of a single rooftop. So my suggestion would be that Another thing for everyone to be focusing on at the local level is the fact that the state, and I think EDA is going to be playing more of a sort of a supporting role on this, but the state is definitely bearing down in the area of energy efficiency. 4 weeks ago, the Board of Public Utilities approved a long pending rate-making petition that your utility in Princeton, mine up in Maplewood in Essex County, PSE&G had filed to sort of support and kind of get sign off for $1 billion in investment in energy efficiency programs around the state. The state is also in the process of transitioning a lot of these programs from the clean energy program of the Board of Public Utilities to the individual utility companies. There's going to be a lot going on in this area, and a lot more sort of profile given to these programs. And I think it would be great, the extent to that Sustainable Princeton and all businesses can focus on what's out there and available and help get the word out, as I know you guys do. I mean, I've seen, your website. I know the climate action plan you guys have, but there's going to be more on offer. And I think many of these things really do square that circle of tension between business success and climate change mitigation.
Thank you. In connection to some of your comments before, there's another question here for Jonathan. Many of Princeton's small businesses rent their locations. In your experience, can the PACE financing model still be helpful to these small businesses that are renting? Also, is this a financing option that is viable for nonprofits or school districts?
Yeah. Okay, to take the easier part first, I mean, it is viable certainly for nonprofits. Again, I'm speaking a little bit theoretically here because I'm speaking to legislation that has not yet been adopted yet. And again, it's not for us at the EDA to be, making specific recommendations around the versions of legislation in this area that are pending. But as a general matter, in other states that have CPACE, there has not been an issue with making it available to nonprofits, even if they don't technically pay property taxes. There's a way for them to use payments in lieu of property tax kinds of arrangements to essentially pay the assessment that enables them, to service the loan. The other question around tenants versus landlords is a very interesting and tricky one. I mean, it gets referred to in the area or in the field as the split incentive issue. The property owner is the one, with the principal interest in seeing that the loan gets repaid, because otherwise, ultimately, it's possible, although I think there have been like 1 or 2 examples in the entire country over the past 7 or 8 years where it's actually happened that a CPACE loan ends up going into foreclosure and a property changes hands because of the failure to make payments on a CPACE loan. So there does need to be that kind of alignment in this case, between the landlord and the tenants. So that and it has to be a discussion so that effectively the tenant and the landlord can collaborate in the economics of bringing that improvement to the property.
Thank you, Jonathan. Michelle, do you want to add anything?
No, I was going to go back to the other question though, in terms of lowered emissions. And we touched on this before, pretty much the theme of having a more walkable town and, lowering emissions that way. And I also just wanted to mention something that hasn't come up before, but I also think that this makes it more sustainable, is the plastics ban and being able to migrate over to, more sustainable uses in terms of the retailers and restaurants. And we'll be doing that now as a reaction to the state ordinance, but it's important as well. And I think that lastly, there's a lot of initiatives that we were getting ready to roll out, Sustainable Princeton with the Merchants Association, and everything kind of got a little bit derailed, but we certainly need to pick back up on that because there are opportunities that we need to make sure that the business community knows about and can take advantage of. So that's it.
So I'm going to take other questions here. I live near Witherspoon Street and love the idea of a winter village. That's a comment. And to Jonathan, have any New Jersey EV battery businesses considered cobalt? What would be the outlook for the battery industry to support electrification targets?
It's pretty down in the weeds. Kind of a big transition from the winter town center. I can say that there are a number of early stage clean tech businesses in the state that are doing some very interesting things with battery chemistry. One of them is based at the Rutgers Eco Complex and in Bordentown. And they are trying to do some very interesting work to kind of move away from the lithium ion, kind of incumbent approach to battery energy storage, and to create a product that's more energy dense, safer, and because of the energy density, they have a lot of interest from the automotive industry, I believe there's at least one company specifically working, in the cobalt development area. There's a company out of Edison called EOS Energy Storage that has been working with zinc oxide as the basic medium. That's actually a very heavy kind of battery type, so that you couldn't put it in a car, but it would work well in a stationary kind of use, like on the grid. I think that there are folks in the state in businesses, and then there's an awful lot of really good work just being done at Princeton University and at Rutgers in particular that I'm aware of, in this area.
Thanks. Another question about EVs. I am very happy to hear about moves to bring more EV trucks onto New Jersey roads. One question more specific to Princeton residents concerns the need of people without a driveway to have access to EV charging stations. Is there a Princeton plan for such residents to have reliable access to public charging stations? There are some out there, but maybe Sustainable Princeton can respond as well. Otherwise, such residents will be unable to reliably charge their cars, thus compromising their ability to play a role in moving to EVs.
Hi, this is Christine, the Program Director at Sustainable Princeton. The Princeton Environmental Commission is right now working on some ordinances, draft ordinances about having electric vehicle charging station as an approved accessory use, and other ordinances to have it be required for certain types of development. Whether or not that includes on-street charging is to be determined, but that would be the effort currently in Princeton where something like that would be happening with the Environmental Commission.
Thank you, Christine. Now, another question for Jonathan related to the New Jersey Green Fund or Bank. What safeguards would be in place to make sure capital is allocated on merit and not to developers with political connections? I am thinking back to the to other Solyndra corporations or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is a reference back to some of the issues that the administration was looking at, in the last, year or two around, some prior programs. But I first of all, I can say that generally speaking, the EDA has been every day all over the basic question of, making sure that there is very strict kind of compliance procedures in place, and the most level possible playing field, in all the programs that we have. There are going to be programs of two kinds. Some would be sort of just first come, first serve, with an absolutely sort of standard application, and you meet the standard requirements, and the loan that you're going to get from this particular bank will benefit from the bank having a guarantee of part of the repayment obligation, so that the bank is willing to loan to support your energy efficiency project, and do it on a lower cost basis and lower interest rate basis than they otherwise would. There may also be projects and programs that are more based upon what you consider to be a request for proposals or project scoring basis. For instance, the New York Green Bank, which operates at a very large scale with like $1 billion of capital on its balance sheet, they just have a series of open requests for proposals, and they have a set of criteria that they use to review those proposals and decide, which ones make the most sense to them. And, this is going to be a core part of what we're going to be working on with this outside consultant, to make sure the programs that we design have very clear and measurable kind of criteria, and that the playing field is completely level. One good thing is that, there are advantages to not being first to the party. There are about another 10 states that have green banks already. And we can learn a lot from their experiences and the kinds of programs that they have put in place. One other thing I can mention quickly is that there's legislation that's now been passed in 2 different forms by the House since last summer to create a national climate bank that would become a major source of funding for state green banks. So depending upon what does or doesn't happen in Washington in the next 2 weeks or the next several months, depending upon how you view how long it'll take things to shake out with the elections, there could be a tremendous additional source of capital to help us, move out with the green bank in a pretty substantial way. But all I can say is, as a general matter, this basic question of the playing field being level and fair is one that I know that the senior management of the authority and every one of us is thinking about every day.
Thank you, Jonathan. There was a question open for Michelle about special improvement districts. Has Princeton looked into special improvement districts that towns like Summit and Springfield have adopted? I think you touched on this briefly, but do you want to explain?
I will, and I want to go back to another question too. But in terms of that, hiring Stuart Copperweiss, who's been involved in about 50 different municipalities through New Jersey, brings that knowledge to us. And we're going to invite executive directors from other special improvement districts or business alliances from various towns to talk with us. So we have very much looked into that, and that's why we hired Stuart for the town to help us in terms of finding what the best methods are and creating this steering committee. So we are looking into that. It's a good question. Thank you. And I just wanted to go back for a couple of things. One is that there was a question before about whether or not Princeton is looking at the municipality looking at going EV and hybrid. And I just want to say we're very committed to doing that. The finance committee is looking into various options right now to migrate where it's possible to EVs and where it's financially feasible. And also we're looking at hybrid possibilities for the bus system and for other transit. So we're very interested in that and very committed to it. And then lastly, I think Molly made a mention too, when we were talking earlier about EV stations for people that don't have a driveway. We are including that in the development projects as part of a requirement or part of an ask that there is EV availability. And we do have a couple of places already in town at the Spring Street Garage and down the shopping center, in case people don't know about that, but it is available. So thank you.
Thanks for clarifying that, Michelle. Yes, thanks to our staff and organizations that have helped out, we've been able to work on installing those EV charging stations, and they've been used. I see cars charging there often. Okay, let's go into our next question here. And maybe again for Sustainable Princeton, if not for Michelle and Jonathan, or for everyone, are there any plans for community solar projects in Princeton? Right.
Hi, this is Christine again. I can answer that. So the municipality is currently looking at applying for pilot program year 2 that the BPU has opened up. That would be a type of project where the municipality would play a role in helping to identify a developer that would build a community solar project that just needs to be within our utility territory. So there is potential for that to happen. Separately, Sustainable Princeton, as an independent nonprofit, has been in developing some materials to help residents who may be solicited by some of the community solar projects that are going to be live soon, to help them to decide between how to select a community solar project that they may want to subscribe to. So stay tuned, you'll probably hear more about that. And if you're, for the person who asked that question, if you're not signed up for a newsletter, I would recommend doing that so you can stay up to date on what's happening with what's going on in terms of community solar projects that are coming up online in PSE&G territory that you might be able to subscribe to.
Thank you, Christine. That's great. And then I have 2 final questions. I don't see a lot more coming up, but one for Michelle and one for Jonathan. So Michelle, what gives you hope for the economic vitality of Princeton?
I think that's a very good question. Thank you. And in the beginning, I had mentioned that we're very blessed in Princeton to have so many wonderful assets. We have so much, we just have a great community. So I think that the coming together of all the business leaders and with the support of the municipality really is going to bring us to that next level. And the revitalization plan, I'm very optimistic will bring about the realization of some of these goals. And so I feel I feel optimistic for the future, and I think it's very bright. So thank you.
Feeling optimistic too. Thanks for all your hard work. And Jonathan, how can the audience, and this is a question from us here, the organizers, how can the audience stay up to date on what the EDA is doing?
Certainly for starters, we've got a crackerjack external communications group that just keeps everything up to the minute, on our website, which is just njeda.com. Not given our kind of quasi business focus, we are a com, not a gov. Certainly, again, I would invite anyone with specific questions about anything that they have been hearing about, or want more information on in the clean energy space in particular, to feel free to reach out to me. You would find the details around the programs that we have under development in the clean energy space by looking to the section of our website titled the Office of Economic Transformation. That is a new area of the EDA that got created in concert with the new development strategy and approach of the Murphy administration. That's very focused on these 8 sectors for innovation, and an innovation focus, of which clean energy is one. So if you looked under Office of Economic Transformation to the clean energy pull down, you would see a lot of information about the latest that we have going on in the clean energy area. We've also got plenty of social media, and you can readily follow us on Twitter, Instagram. We've got a very active Facebook page as well.
Perfect. No excuses. Thank you, Jonathan and Michelle, for your time and for sharing such valuable information. And thank you all for attending.
And if I could just say, again, if you want to reach me, I didn't see the slide go up, but the email address is simply jratner, JRATNER, there it is, at njeda.com. And you see my phone number as well, cell phone number. I do hope to hear from folks.
Thanks for including me. It was really enjoyable.
Just a moment.
Yeah, thank you.
Before you leave, we want to make sure folks are aware of the coming events that we have. Give me just a moment. So please don't forget, we have our next Great Ideas events coming up to go deeper into the co-benefits, the Climate Action Plan. We also have the repair cafes. So as part of the Climate Action Plan, we're trying to extend the useful life of all the material goods that we have. And in order to do that, we should reuse, repair before we buy new. So Sustainable Princeton will be working with the Princeton Shopping Center to host some repair cafes. So mark the calendar for that. We'll be doing bike repair, sewing basics, and some chair repair. So if you got anything broken around the house like that you want to fix, hold on to them and come figure out how to fix them. And well, that concludes our event for tonight. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to our moderator.
Thank you.
Reminder that this is recorded on our YouTube channel, and wish everyone a good night. So be well and be safe.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.
Thanks for all your work around this.